Got it.
Okay, so, and let me mute all two. So this is what I thought we would talk about today. I want to say a few words, and then let's see if there's something to discuss about it. So, Jews and the news. What I was thinking about today is that title, How to Celebrate Being Jewish When the News is So Terrible. So we're getting ready to celebrate Passover, the end of the week, right? A holiday in which we're celebrating our freedom and commemorating the ancient story of the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, et cetera, et cetera. So an event purportedly that took place 3,000 years ago. An event that has been celebrated every year by Jews since then. So it's the oldest celebrating Passover, aside from Shabbat, is really the oldest thing, one of the oldest things we do. Circumcision, Shabbat, and Passover are the oldest things that we do continuously since the beginning of Jewish time. So this holiday, which is a joyous holiday, how does one be joyous when news around us is so bad? So 2 years ago, we were figuring out how to celebrate Passover in the midst of COVID, right? And we're all scrounging what to do, having a Seder over Zoom and all of that. Okay, so that was pretty bad. And fortunately this year, for the most part, we're going to be able to have healthy, safe Seders with family and friends with us. So that's good. But COVID is still rampant. And, I have an appointment for my second booster shot, which I'm going to have during Passover next week. So we all, thank God, we're doing okay when it comes to COVID. But there's so much else happening in the world around us that really, if we take it seriously, which I don't know how we can, really weighs on us. And I just wrote down a couple of things. I got 5 things on my list that I just came up quickly that are weighing on me. So we should all be celebrating the fact that the Supreme Court of the United States is going to have the very first African-American woman as a justice. Okay, it took 233 years, however long, for this to happen, and it's something to celebrate. It should absolutely be something to celebrate, and it's really a shanda, I'll use that Yiddish term, a shanda when the vote went down in the Senate last week, that the Republicans walked out. Okay, so that's as far as I'll get with the politics about it. But and during her confirmation process as well, it's really like, you wonder why I'm bald. Pull out your hair about why couldn't it have been a process just talking about legal philosophy? Why instead did it have to be so political and so heart-wrenching to watch? And I felt for Senator Cory Booker of the proceedings. I just happened to turn it on when Cory Booker used his time to say what he said in support, as a fellow African-American, talking in support of Ketanji Brown Jackson. So there's that. What does it say about our country with her confirmation and what the whole confirmation process was like? So it's using that by extension, the state of civil discourse in our country and how there isn't civil discourse anymore. So there's that's weighing on me. There is a wave of terrorism in Israel now, which, depends on how you read it, whether you read it in the Washington Post or you read it on Times of Israel, how these events, these shootings are reported. So it's clear that these random acts that are happening, which are so hard for the army and the police to stop, right? So the attacks that used to take place were done by people wearing bomb vests, so that if you were trained to look for it, you could see it and have some warning. Now, it's people driving by or walking by with a gun. And that is extremely hard to stop, because in Israel, lots of people walk the streets with a gun. Not just people in uniform, but people out of uniform are walking the streets with guns tucked in their pants behind their back. So it's really, really hard for the police and other security forces to be able to stop something before it happens. And so these shootings that have happened since Be'er Sheva a couple of weeks ago, and then just Tel Aviv the other day, are really, really hard to stop. But they are being perpetrated by Palestinians who are coming over the fence or the barrier, who are ISIS or supporters of ISIS, at least one or two of them were, perpetrating acts of violence. I would commend you to Gershom Gorenberg's op-ed in the Washington Post today. That's all I'll say politically about that. I highly recommend that article. Okay, just Google Gershom Gorenberg, Washington Post, April 11th. And you'll see what I think is a very good article about this. So the state of America, as embodied in Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearing and vote, terrorism in Israel, the government of Israel about to collapse, because it was precarious from the get-go by having only 61, so just a one vote majority, and it precarious in that it's a whole from left to right represented in the government, including an Arab party as well. One member of one of the right-wing parties bolted for the other side. So now it's a government with 60. So that's, it's not a majority. It's like the Democrats in the Senate, right? There are 50 Democrats in the Senate. The only reason why the Democrats are in the majority is because the vice president, who is a Democrat, is the deciding vote. So that's in Israel now, that it's unclear where that extra vote would come from, if anything comes up for a vote in the Knesset now. So it's possible another Arab party could be part of it, but if you follow the news on Times of Israel, you'll see all about that. So those of us who care about Israel, whether we care about the government of Israel or the people of Israel, we have weighing on us a wave of terrorist shootings that have been happening the past few weeks, and the government of Israel on the verge of collapse. We still have COVID going on, right? And how are we going to be celebrating Passover this year? How many people are going to be able to come to our seders? Is it still safe? Right? There are people coming down with still being fully vaccinated and boosted, is still testing positive. So that's still weighing on us. And of course, what's going on in Ukraine and the horrific devastation that Russia is perpetrating on the country, shootings, devastation, destruction of cities. It's just, you just read the paper today about Mariupol. Is the city of Mariupol on the Black Sea is totally wiped out, and with hundreds, if not thousands, of Ukrainian civilians shot dead by Russian soldiers as well, being found in the streets of Mariupol and in the suburbs of Kyiv and in other places in eastern Ukraine. It's just barbaric, horrific, absolutely devastating. And so part of me, and I shouldn't say this, but part of me wonders, because I'm a student of history and I just don't live as a Jew now in 2022, but I very much base my Judaism on my history. And I can't help think of Ukraine without thinking about the Khmelnytsky pogroms in Ukraine 250 years ago, or 350 years ago. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were wiped out in these Ukrainian pogroms. 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews killed in the Holocaust, many by the Nazis, but many by Ukrainians themselves, right? Babi Yar happened by the Nazis with help from Ukrainians. So part of me is kind of like Purim, revenge against the Persians. Haman wanted to kill us. Well, let's get the Persians back. Ukrainians wanted to kill us and did kill us over the centuries. Well, good for the Ukrainians that they're being, no. So that's why I shouldn't be saying this. But part of me can't help but say it. Okay, knowing that in every generation, people are out to get the Jews. So then we have this, I have this difficulty, this emotional difficulty dealing with Ukraine. It's devastation, and absolutely we should be supporting the people of Ukraine and the rabbis and other Jewish leaders who have gone on solidarity missions to Poland to work with the refugees, bring supplies, toiletries, diapers, other things like that for clothing for Ukrainian refugees. Absolutely should be done. And our own Rabbi Stephen Abraham, who grew up in our shul, son of Wendy and Richard Abraham, just came back from Ukraine last week. He and a colleague from Omaha brought 28 duffel bags worth of supplies to Poland to donate to the refugee effort there. Absolutely should be done, and Stephen Abraham should be applauded for that work, and the Jewish Federations of North America should be applauded for their work in support, and the Joint Distribution Committee in Europe, all the Jewish agencies there, HIAS, all the other organizations that are working around the clock to support the refugees, the Jewish organizations doing that, absolutely should be supported in doing this. So there's lots of things weighing on us this year as we are about to celebrate Passover. Rita, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm very glad you made that statement. I have difficulty with the Ukrainians myself. Of course, I'm all for helping them, and I'm so happy that the entire world is willing to help them.
Yes,
If it were Jews, I don't know if they would be so willing to help.
that's right.
My own grandparents, who were very pious, they gave credit to Ukrainians. My grandfather owned a dry goods store. The same Ukrainians went ahead during World War II and they really butchered them. I mean, they
Yes.
let my grandfather witness the horrible death with farm implement.
Yep.
So yes, I have a lot of mixed feelings
Yeah.
about it. And yet my heart goes out when I see the children, because I was a child
Right.
myself.
Right.
But yet the doors are open. They're not being sent to any concentration camps.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I'm very glad you made that statement.
I appreciate, Rita. It's I hear you, and I thank you for sharing that. So so you and I are different in that you lived through it yourself, and there's no way I can imagine what that was like as a child, running from forest to forest, from farm to farm, with your mother, with your family, trying to save your lives during the war. So I can't imagine what that was like. So I hear you. I totally get what you're saying. But that's who we are as a Jewish people. We can't help it. We have to love the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. So that's like the number one principle that's taught in the Torah 36 times. Our hearts have to go out. We can't help but have our hearts go out to those who are suffering, even if those who are suffering, their grandparents killed us. Right? So, so it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard for you, Rita, and other survivors like you from Ukraine, Romania. The borders were fluid at that time. So lots of people from the Ukraine today, back then, that isn't Ukraine today, still remember these, would say the Ukrainians, and then there's a Hebrew phrase that goes with it, Yamach Shemam, their name should be blotted out. Right? There's some people who say, anytime they say Hitler's name, Yamach Shemo, his name should be blotted out, wiped out. So yeah, you can't help feeling that way. It's kind of, and it's and you wonder, like you said, Rita, if these were Jews, would people care about what's happening to if these were Jewish people who are being attacked? Right? God forbid, if Israel was under attack right now, would people be coming to Israel's defense? I don't know, and I don't want to have to worry about that right now. But it is, so then the other thing is, we're reaching out. We're saying we should reach out, but if we have these feelings in the back of our heads, how authentic are we being when we're saying we should be supporting the people of Ukraine now? When we have this history in the back of our heads, when we have Rita's own story, her own life story, that you remember, your own personal memories, right? So it's very, very, very difficult. Very difficult.
But we are reaching out.
We are.
As an example, my cousin's father was also from the Ukraine, and his daughter, who is an officer, and they're Orthodox in the Israeli army.
Yeah.
She went to Lvov on a special mission. She's in her 20s.
Very good.
So
very good.
We are helping. We are Jews, and
absolutely. Israel sent a field hospital to help out as well. So absolutely, we're helping, and we should be helping. And it would be a shanda if we weren't helping. Absolutely. Absolutely. Arnie.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. My mother's side of the family was from Ukraine. They lived in Korostysha, which is near Kiev.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, especially, was it's not far from where the this Rebbe, what's his name? The Berditcher Rebbe, maybe.
Okay.
and they were very much engaged with that person.
Huh.
He tried to convince them not to leave.
Huh.
Because, a lot of the rabbis did in that time. But my grandmother told me stories about when, she had 3 children. My grandfather would come to the US. She was scared every day going to the market.
Wow.
She was frightened on any Christian holiday like
Right.
Easter, Christmas.
Right.
My 2 aunts and an uncle were born there, and they told me stories as well.
Yep.
That how they were treated in school.
Yep.
And so, I feel very lucky that my grandfather and my grandmother on that side
Yeah.
decided to leave.
Yeah.
And even though there's a Jewish community there now, and it's
Yeah.
substantial,
Yes.
and I care about them, and I actually, I tried to help out by making donations to JDC and places like that. But I just feel mixed feelings like you do very much.
Yeah.
Because it was a terrible place for Jews. And
Absolutely.
My own family made it very, told me those stories.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And
that's all.
I don't understand. I really, part of me just does not understand how there is Jewish life in Europe today, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, which are the most anti-Semitic of all the countries in Europe. It's just really, really hard to be Jewish. We can't imagine. I mean, just God forbid, we've lived through Tree of Life in Pittsburgh and the synagogue in Texas this past January, and Poway, the Chabad in Poway and San Diego. So we've had those, and there was a Jew who was lynched in Georgia 100 years ago. So there are episodes of anti-Semitism that have happened here in America, but it nowhere near compares to what happened and is happening in Europe, right? The irony of ironies is that the safest place to be a Jew in Europe today is in Germany. So incredible, just incredible. So it's just really, really hard. And I have misgivings if we ever travel again, my wife and I on vacation. If we go to Europe, I have misgivings about going to Europe because of how fragile Jewish life in Europe is. It just so. I mean, Arnie was just there. I was in Barcelona with my wife a few years ago, and to go to shul on a Friday night in Barcelona, this is a few years ago, I don't know, 2018, 17, something like that. You can't tell where the synagogue is. It's a metal door, and it's guarded by a heavily armed security guard, and you have to show a passport in order to get in. Okay, so we can't, imagine coming to shul on Shabbat here in Olney if you had to do that. Would anybody want to come to shul? But this is what you have to do in Europe, and that's not unusual for Spain. There are other countries in Europe that is the exact same way. So it's just incredibly, incredibly difficult to be Jewish in Europe today, and it's 200,000 Jews in Ukraine before the war started. So I don't know how many are left now, because many were brought to Israel, but 200,000 Jews in Ukraine, of all places. It's crazy. Saul.
Yes, I don't want to extend the time, but I touched a nerve. Both my parents were born in Ukraine, and they came over here as young children. And my mother was from the area of Proskorov, which is renamed Khmelnytsky. It. But anyway, they in 1919 they had a pogrom where they killed thousands of people, including a lot of her family. She happened to be in the United States, and
Right.
she told me a story where. When they knew that the Cossacks were coming, they had a false bottom on their floor and they had a rug on it, and they pull the rug away and go and hide underneath,
Right,
till they were gone. And my father's family was from Bershit, which is near Moldova and Romania.
Right.
Central southern. It's not too far from Uman, where they have they goes to the grandson of the Baal
Yeah,
Shem
and Nachman of Bratslav, yes, where he's,
Right.
yeah,
So in World War II, the Nazis and the Ukrainians moved a lot of Jews to that town and killed them.
Yeah.
Over 25,000 of them, and I'm sure there were quite a few that I don't know about that remain there, because not everybody came to this
Right.
country.
right.
So I also have a lot of
Many of us have connections, but most of us who are from Eastern Europe originally have connections there. So my mother's father was born in Zhytomyr, which is just to the west of Kiev. And so he came to this country in the early 1900s. I think all my grandparents came to America around 1903, 1905, something like that. But I think my grandfather came by way of Argentina. So there was one of these, like Montefiore, I think, had some kind of farming colony in Argentina, and a lot of Eastern European Jews went there. So he went from Argentina, he came to Philadelphia. So I think that was a story, but I don't know. My grandfather died when I was 12, so I wasn't able to ask him the questions personally. So anyway, so we all have, and we have the Zittimers who are members of the synagogue. I'm sure Marty, may rest in peace, his family is from there. Why else have that name? So many of us have the connection. So we all have stories like this. And imagine having a house that you had to have a trap door like that, just in case, it's Easter or it's Christmas or some other time that the mobs are raging. So let's hide under the floor now. So yes. So what I wanted to get to with all of this is not just to share these stories, which is important to share these stories about Ukraine, and we can share these stories around the Seder table too, because it's all about, we're supposed to tell the story from degradation to victory, degradation to triumph. That's the timeline of the story that we're supposed to tell. So from our days in slavery until we're freed by God through the 10 plagues and the crossing of the sea, that's how we're supposed to tell the story. And in every generation, we're supposed to imagine as if we have left Egypt. So there are a variety of these stories that we can tell that of our grandparents leaving the anti-Semitic persecution and oppression of Europe and their exodus to the Golden Medina, the golden country of America, which isn't quite the story of going to Israel, but still it's a story of freedom and making something of ourselves and making a life where it's safer to be Jewish. So that's a story that needs to be told and retold every year around the Seder table. So what's happening in Ukraine now brings that aspect of the story to life for all of us. But with that coupled with, or tripled or quadrupled or quintupled with all the other things that I shared that are weighing on all of us, if we are serious people, thinking people, caring people, we can't help but be affected by everything else that is going on in the world around us. It is really hard to concentrate and focus on preparing for Passover and ignoring what's happening around us. And so all the work that's involved in celebrating Passover, cleaning the house, going to the store to buy all the kosher goods, and preparing the meals for the Seders, it's a lot of work involved in doing that. And you wonder as you do it, what's the point when all these terrible things are happening all around us, when we are living in a society that is uncaring and unfeeling, a society that is so fractured, American society I'm talking about, is so fractured today that it's hard to imagine Republicans and Democrats sitting around the table together having a decent conversation, a conversation of mutual respect, and that that sense of camaraderie is lacking. That with all the other terrible things, I didn't even mention climate change and global warming, right? There's that too going on around us, that the world on the verge of point of no return, of saving the world from the collapse from the ozone layer and the rising sea level. There's a lot weighing on us, and it's very, very difficult to ignore all that as we prepare to celebrate a holiday. And I think part of this is that's the whole point of the preparation, that it's not, the preparation is supposed to lead us to be thinking about what's happening in the world around us, to then say, what are we going to do about it? Right? So that our preparation for Passover isn't just about how we can, in our bubble, celebrate the holiday and fulfill the mitzvah of having Passover, having a Seder, eating matzah, etc. It's not just about being in that bubble with blinders on. It's about how we're going to allow the meaning of Passover to enter into our soul, to then transform us and motivate us to do something about it. Now, I'm not sure what we as individuals can do to make the world any better. But just as like when you vote in the elections, is one vote going to matter? Well, yes. One vote coupled with all the other votes matter. So one person observing Passover and being touched and inspired by the meaning of the holiday can then inspire somebody else who can inspire somebody else who can inspire somebody else. So I think that the point of celebrating in the midst of despair is, and this also is true, by the way, think about in our own personal life, God forbid we have a health issue that we're dealing with, whether we ourselves are not healthy and dealing with something, or a member of our family, that could be the most overwhelming of all, right? And it is the most overwhelming of all. So if you're dealing with a health scare, or God forbid a death in a family, how do you, in the midst of that, observe the holiday of Passover, which you're commanded to do, by the way. If you're sitting Shiva, God forbid a funeral happens this week, and normally Shiva would pick up again after the weekend. Let's say, and this has happened to me as a rabbi, having to officiate, let's say on Friday, the day of the Seder, there is no Shiva then. You have Shiva that for an hour, and then no Shiva at all. Like you don't pick up after the holiday is over. That doesn't happen. If the death occurs and the funeral occurs before the holiday begins, whatever time you have before the holiday, that's Shiva, and then that's it. Because you're forced by the tradition to be focused on the community and your place within the community. And that your personal grief has to be, is outweighed by the celebration of the holiday. So that you have to attend a Seder, and you have to observe the days of Passover and the entire holiday. It's different if the death occurs during Passover. Then Shiva is postponed until the entire holiday is over. But if the death occurs before the entire Passover holiday begins, then Passover out. So it's difficult. So if you have a personal issue that you're dealing with, whether it's health or death, to be able to then focus on the holiday with all the other world things that are happening as well, it could be almost too overwhelming to overcome. And that's where we need the strength of community, and that Passover and all Jewish celebration isn't meant to be observed individually. They are meant to be observed in community. If the temple were standing and we have to bring the Passover sacrifice, the Passover lamb, 99% of the time, a family would go in on a lamb with another family. One person doesn't bring a lamb by him or herself. It's a group of people bringing the lamb and then having it sacrificed and roasted, and then those families eating that lamb together. Okay, so even the Passover sacrifice is done in community. And so therefore, Seder is done in community. Everything we do is done best in community. And so I think then that's the lesson here that I take away. How to be Jewish, so Jews and the news, how to be Jewish in the midst of all this terrible news happening is that we are Jewish in community, and that we have the strength, we find strength and support from our friends and family, so that together we can commiserate, we can share our burdens, and then help each other be able to see the spiritual, the holiness and the message of the holiday, to help hopefully motivate us to try to bring healing to the world around us. Any other thought? Yeah, Robert.
Well, a couple of things.
Yeah.
You asked about legal arguments during the Supreme Court hearings.
The confirmation hearings. Yeah.
Legal arguments don't get you on Fox News and doesn't play well to your base.
That's true. That's true.
And it kind of works both ways.
No, absolutely.
Number one. Number two is the Russians and Ukrainians historically hate each other.
Right.
I mean, Stalin, the reason the Ukrainians support the Nazis is Stalin was horrible to the Ukrainians.
Right.
So that's another thing.
Now
Gershon Gorenberg and I, we share a great grandparent.
Oh, huh.
Because our great grandparents came from Siemiatycz, Poland.
Okay.
So
Small world.
it's a very small world.
So did you read his article today?
I haven't got, I start with the sports page, that's where I start with my paper. I'll get there.
I do that too, Robert. So so just read Gershon Gorenberg's article. I don't know about your politics vis-a-vis Israel, but I think that no matter what your politics are, you can't help sympathize with a lot, if not of everything, what he says in his op-ed. What you say about the Russians and the Ukrainians hating each other, I understand that absolutely. I understand that historically. We would imagine, at least I would imagine, in the year 2022, that we, the world global community, would have learned its lessons from the barbarism of the past and not be barbaric anymore. And the tragedy is that the world hasn't. And that, so you have a world leader like Putin who wants to be recognized and wants to pal around with Western leaders, and then perpetrates or has his generals, gives the order for generals to perpetrate wanton killing of civilians, as many as possible in Ukraine. It's just, it's like reading history from World War II, but it's happening today. The Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda from the 1990s, or what the the Serbs did to each other, right? The Orthodox Christian did to the Muslim Serbs in Yugoslavia in the 90s as well. So, right, so it's still, what does that say about human nature? That there's something in us. And I would say, are Russians so different from Americans in terms of genetics that makes Russians so barbaric and Americans not? That's what I'm concerned about. We are a global human community. We have similar DNA with all human beings in the world today. If several groups of people can be barbaric in their action, what does that say about us? There's something in us that is animalistic and barbaric and savage. And that's frightening. It's frightening to see. So yeah, so that history is there of hating each other. But what's even worse is that allowing that hate to cause the savagery. That is really awful. Any other, yes, Lori.
Yeah, I really appreciate this class. It's been great. And one thought I had in terms of drawing inspiration and approaching Passover in this context is to think about throughout Jewish history, all the times that Jews have had to celebrate Passover under really, really trying circumstances.
Absolutely.
Including, I'm sure, in secret.
Yeah.
And no matter what, the spirit of telling the story of liberation and continuing that path of, how to, go from this narrow place to a bigger, more free place, has stayed with us no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking over at my shelf while you were talking, Lori, because what came to mind is this book, Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust by Yafa Eliach. She was a professor of Hasidism or history or something at Brooklyn College. And she collected this anthology of Hasidic stories from the Holocaust itself and from the concentration camp. And there are stories in here about how Passover was observed in the concentration camp. And it's incredible. Like, really? You're going to think tomorrow could be your last day. Today could be your last day in the concentration camp. And you're thinking about how you're going to observe Passover and feel badly that you don't have matzah to eat. That's how devout our ancestors have been throughout the centuries. And it's really, really incredible. So I'm sure you can get this book. It was published in 1982. Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. Really, really moving and inspiring. I've shared stories from here over the years. I haven't in a long time, but perhaps perhaps this is a year to try to bring some of these stories back. Really, really incredible. And there's also another book from another rabbi from Poland, the Przhnecki Rebbe, I think was his name. He wrote something called Eish Kodesh, the Holy Fire, and these are sermons that he gave to his community in the ghetto.
Wow.
Before he was taken out and shot by the Nazis. So they didn't go to the concentration camp. They were in the ghetto. This is before they went to the concentration camp. There are 3 years of sermons. Holy Fire. If you look that up, the Holy Fire, and you have to have Chassid in there if you're going to Google it to see the English translation for that, to see some of his sermons. And it's really mind-boggling. So, sometimes I wonder what kind of Jew I would have been like, God forbid, 80 years ago. I have no idea. what kind of rabbi I would have been like, what kind of Jew I would have been like in that time. It's quite inspirational to read about that. So this is during the Holocaust, during the Crusades, during the pogroms, the Khmelnytsky pogroms, during the Inquisition in Spain, when Jews had to pretend to be Christian, and how do they eat matzah in secret? How do they bake matzah, let alone eat it in secret and have a seder? So it's what our ancestors went through in order for us to even be here. So it's quite incredible. Any other thoughts? Yes, Saul.
Yeah. You asked, what can we do?
Yeah.
Well, as all of us know, we get thousands of emails and letters from Jewish organizations
Yeah.
to send money.
Yeah.
That's something that we can do, but we kind of feel far away from the action. Well, I happened to hear Stephen Abraham's Friday night remarks.
Yeah.
And it opened up my eyes quite a bit, and it opened his eyes quite a bit. He was sponsored by the Jewish Federation.
Right.
And he had, I wouldn't say negative comments about the Jewish Federation, what he thought before the trip.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, like, they're always asking for money. We don't know where they send the money, this kind of thing. But what he said was the Federation went in there and they had the long pockets.
Yes.
And they rented 2 hotels, big hotels. They put up an Israeli flag across the border, and they had these computer systems already set up so that you could search whether you were Jewish or not. And so they know where to send, the Jewish people if they wanted to go to Israel, or the non-Jewish if they wanted to go to Israel, because there were a certain amount. And he said, like, they didn't have to wait for donations to come in.
Yeah.
They, to do this, they just put out the money and did it. And I know that our family has given, and we're going to give again. And he just thought it was remarkable.
Yeah, so our federation, I'm glad you shared that. Our federation, if you go, their web address is shalomdc.org. So if you go to shalomdc.org, on the front page of the website will be how to donate to help Ukraine. So 100% of the money goes to this relief effort. And Jewish Federations of North America, absolutely. The Joint Distribution Committee that's there on the ground in Europe always has been there to help the Jewish communities, especially the poor and disadvantaged Jewish communities in the smaller European countries. And HIAS, I mean, these are the 3 places to send money to that guaranteed that your money is going to go, not for overhead, but for immediate relief efforts. And yes, it's the easiest thing we can do, and probably the best thing we can do. If not, also, now I don't know about actual supplies and how to get supplies over there. That might have to wait if there's going to be some kind of mission happening from here. And then,
well, his synagogue sent like they couldn't fit it on one on one plane. They had to go on 2 planes.
Yeah,
I think the Federation knows what the supplies are, and they can order them. It's just they need the money. Right.
So I highly recommend that. So the easiest thing, shalomdc.org, and just click on the Donate to Ukraine Now button, and then you can do it. So, all right. So I wish everybody what they say, a Zisen Pesach, a sweet Pesach, a happy and a kosher Passover, and that may it be a meaningful one as well for all of us. And next Monday will be during the holiday of Passover, and I think we'll still have a session next Monday, maybe we can debrief from how our first 2 days of Passover went and what we did to kind of make our Seders more meaningful. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take
You
care.
too, Chag Sameach. Thank
Chag
you.
Sameach.
Hak Sameach.
So may